Welcome back to Civil War Reports. I'm your War of the Rebellion reporter, Brian Thomas Kopak. In Episode 2, Part 1, we took a look at the Northwest Ordinance of 1787 and how that truly laid some of the groundwork for what would ultimately be the war between the states. Here, in Part 2, we're going to take a look at another document, also signed in 1787, the U.S. Constitution. And we're going to pay close attention to the wordings in Article 1 of the Constitution in regard to slavery. In my opinion, the South truly went to war over the issue of states' rights, but there's no getting around the fact that slavery was a major underlying cause. So, in this episode, we're going to take a look at how the U.S. Constitution, in my opinion, truly laid the foundation for what would ultimately be the American Civil War. As the Northwest Ordinance was being ratified, it was becoming very clear that the Articles of Confederation were just not working. That if this new experiment, this new nation, these United States of America were going to survive as one nation, that a new government needed to be created. In the spring of 1787, it was decided to hold a convention in Philadelphia, in the very same building that the Declaration was signed almost 11 years earlier to the day, that this convention should take place under the guise of amending the Articles of Confederation. 12 of the 13 states sent delegates to this convention to amend the Articles. Rhode Island never sent a delegation. On May 25th, 1787, the convention opened. And it was quickly decided that the Articles were just too damaged, just too flawed to even be amended. That they should be scrapped, and in its place, a new document, a new government, a new federal government should be created. And as a result of this new federal government, there would be radical changes between the Articles of Confederation and this new federal government. This new federal government would have the power to tax, have the power to raise an army and a navy, have the power to coin and print money, and have the power to create treaties, just to name a few of the differences. As a result of this new federal government, unlike the Articles, there would be a two-house legislature. There would be a true executive branch, and a judicial branch would also be created. Let us take a look at the two-house legislature. The upper called for equal representation among the states. 2 senators per state, regardless of the state's population. The lower house, however, would be made up of representatives based on population. There would be 1 representative for every 30,000 free people or equivalent. What do I mean by that? Well, let's look at Article 1, Section 2. And it says, I quote, "Representatives and direct taxes shall be apportioned among the several states which may be included within this Union, according to their respective numbers, which shall be determined by adding the whole number of free persons, including those bound to service for a term of years, and excluding Indians not taxed, 3/5 of all other persons." End quote. So basically what this meant was each state would add up the number of its free persons, which would be done every 10 years by census, which we still do in the United States today. And you would look at the number of free persons, which was their way of basically saying white people. And we exclude the Indians, the indigenous folks that were here when the Europeans arrived, and all other persons, simply put, the slaves, would count as 3/5 of a person to determine representation for the lower house. Now, when we look at the American Civil War, I generally side with the South on the political issues. When it comes to the issue of states' rights, I'm on board with the South. However, when it comes to issues like this, it appears that the Southerners wanted to play both sides of the card. On the one hand, the slaves were not free people. They were not to be considered persons who were entitled to, well, basically certain liberties that the white Americans were entitled to at that time. But when it came to representation in Congress, well, then we have to count them, but we'll count them as 3/5 of a person. That's why when you hear some people say today that black people are 3/5 of a person, this is where that originates from. But going back to the argument of states' rights and liberties and counting population, I'm not on board with the South here because it looks like they want to play both sides of the card. You can't say on the one hand somebody's not a person and not entitled to liberty, but then they need to be counted towards representation. That's just my opinion. And again, the Constitution, unlike the Northwest Ordinance, never mentions slavery by name. If you noticed, 3/5 of all other persons. There's another part of the Constitution in which slavery is, well, mentioned, but not by mentioning it. Article 1, Section 9 deals with the importation of slaves, and I quote, "The migration or importation of such persons as any of the states now existing shall think proper to admit shall not be prohibited by Congress prior to the year 1808, but a tax or duty may be imposed on such importation not exceeding $10 for each person," close quote. What is this saying? Basically saying that the slave importation can continue until the year 1808. After that, Congress has the power to decide whether or not slave importation could continue or not. Basically what they were doing in 1787 was kicking the can down the road. 20 years basically after the Constitution would be ratified, slave importation could continue or it could be halted. So, slave importation would continue until the year 1808, and it would be halted after that year. Does that mean slave importation in the United States stopped at 1808? Absolutely not. Slave importation would continue up to and including during the American Civil War. It just was outlawed. But that doesn't mean it didn't stop. It continued, and it became a very lucrative business for some people who defied the law to import slaves. If there ever was a great cause for the wrong reason, it was the Confederate States of America. While I agree wholeheartedly with the South when it comes to the issue of states' rights, I simply can't get on board with them when it comes to the issue of slavery. If you think about the United States, it was formed when 13 independent states agreed to give up some of their sovereignty to create a greater whole. But, got to remember, it was 13 independent states, each one with its own set of rights and its own sovereignty, agreeing to give up some of those rights in effort to make a greater whole. But they did not give up all of their rights. And that's why I agree with the South when it comes to the issue of states' rights. But again, I just can't get on board with the idea of one person owning another human being. Today we looked at two very important documents that I truly believe are the origins of the American Civil War. The Northwest Ordinance created what would be several future states out of that territory. Each one of those states would be forbidden to have slavery. Between 1787 and 1861, the United States grew. It grew in size, but it also grew in population. But that population growth was disproportionate. The North grew at a much larger pace than did the South. And by 1861, the population of the North greatly dwarfed that of the South. Also, during that same time period, the cries against slavery became louder and louder, and the North, having more voices, drowned out the South. To the South, it became a matter of keeping a balance of power. For every new Northern free state that entered the Union, the South believed that a slave state must also enter. Now, during this time period, there would be several compromises to try to keep the Union together, and we will look at them in future episodes. But this, from the Southern point of view, they needed to maintain this balance of power during that time period. They knew that the North would always have a larger population. That became quite obvious early on. But it was very important for them to maintain a balance of power in the Senate because each state had an equal representation of 2 senators per state. So the South needed to keep that balance, keep an equal number of slave senators to the equal number of free senators. They also needed to make sure they had a friend in the White House, the executive branch. To the South, it was very important that the person occupying the White House was either a Southerner or a Southern sympathizer. And that would pretty much be the case until the election of 1860. I promise in future episodes we will spend more time looking at all of the divisions that were created between 1787 and 1861. But for now, for Civil War Reports, I'm your War of Rebellion reporter, Brian Thomas Kopak. Until next time, please keep the history alive. Thank you. And if you like what you saw today, please hit the subscribe button. Give a thumbs up. Also, notify your friends. Let them know about this channel and ask them to subscribe as well. If you like, you may leave a question or a comment below, and perhaps I will answer your question in a future episode of Civil War Reports. Until next time, please keep the history alive.